Hey guys, in this video I'll be going over navigation for the MiG-21. The MiG-21 has three different things for navigation. It has the compass, the arc system, and the RSBN system. So for the compass, the white arrow shows what direction you're going. So you can see I'm going about 70 degrees right now. This knob right here is for setting the runway heading. And over time the compass can become misaligned. If that happens, you just level the plane out and you hold down this button that says FDS, and it will realign. So next is the arc system. So around the map there's different stations you can tune into, and these stations are constantly emitting Morse code, and you can tune into them and they will tell you where to go. Alright, so let's go over how to use the arc system. First you have to power it on. You just power it on with this switch right here. Then you have to choose where you want to fly to. Unfortunately, the F10 map does not show the arc stations, so in order to see them you have to open your kneeboard. So you hold right control and click the up arrow, and it will open the kneeboard, and you can use these arrows on the bottom left of the kneeboard to go over to the arc page. So you need to get to this page here. This shows the arc stations for the Caucasus map. So you need to find which station you want to fly to. So let's say I want to fly to this one right here, station 2. So you need to see what sector it's in. So you can see this one I want to fly to is in sector 3-1. And you come over to the right and you put this switch to sector 3-1. Then you need to put in your station. So you can see I want to go to station 2, so I click number 2 right here. Then this switch right here, you need to put it down to compass. And then the last thing to do is go to this switch on the left and make sure it's pointing down to arc. Then there is this little needle on your compass with the circle on the end. By default, this needle will just be pointing 45 degrees to the right, but once your plane locks onto the arc station, the needle will move. As you can see, my plane hasn't found the arc station yet. If your plane can't find it, most of the time the reason why is because your altitude is too low. So I will put up a chart that will show what altitude you have to be at. So I'm going to go ahead and climb now so I can pick up the signal. Once you pick up the signal, you might hear some Morse code. If you want to turn it off, you just turn down this switch that says arc volume. If you want to hear the Morse code but you can't hear it, you need to make sure this switch is pointing down to compass. Alright, so since I've picked it up, you can see the needle with the circle has moved now. It's pointing to about 320 degrees. So let's go ahead and check to make sure that's right. So if the station is around near Sukhumi, and you can see 309, 310 degrees, so that's pretty accurate. By the way, for this needle, the circle is the end of it. The skinny part is the head. Unfortunately, the arc system does not give range, it just gives direction. The way that you will know you've reached the station is that once you fly over it, this needle will spin around. Alright, so now let's go over the RSBN system. So the RSBN system is pretty similar to the arc system. There's basically just different stations around the map, and each station has a channel you can tune into. The only difference is that the RSBN system is a little bit better because it also gives you range. So here's how it works. First you need to power it on. So you come to your right side and you power on the RSBN switch. Then you need to choose where you want to fly. Unfortunately, the F10 map does not show RSBN stations, so you have to check it on the kneeboard. You hold right control and click the up arrow to open the kneeboard, and you go back to this page here, RSBN Caucasus. So let's say I want to fly to Kutaisi. I come and I see that Kutaisi is channel 13. So what I do is I go to this panel on the left. This is the RSBN panel, and I type in channel 13. Don't worry about the landing now, I'll go over that later. For now, we're just navigating. Once you get these green lights, it means you've locked onto the channel. These two switches here don't do anything. The volume switch is if you want to hear the Morse code. And if you click the red button, it will just forget the channel for a couple seconds, and then it will lock back onto it. Last thing, once you've connected to your channel, you want to make sure you go to this switch we were looking at earlier, and you want to flip it up to RSBN. And once you do that, your circle needle will point to the RSBN station. Once again, the circle part is the tail, and the skinny part of it is the head. So as you can see, it's very similar to the arc system. The only difference is that this also gives us range. So if you come to this, you can see it's 43 kilometers away. That was the basics of the RSBN system. Now I will go over radial navigation. So you can see I'm flying to Kutaisi right now, and I'm coming in from the west. But what if I didn't want to come in from this direction? Let's say I wanted to come in from the northwest, so from up here. So that is what radial navigation is. Every direction to the station it's considered a different radial. So let's go over how to use it. So first you got to see what direction you want to come in from. So let's say I want to come into the station from this direction. So I'd put my compass up here, and then I would go to the station, and I would look at that angle there. It's 119 degrees. So I'm going to go to my compass, and I'm going to dial in to 119. Now keep in mind, whenever you move your dial, it's going to move this hollow needle. For the hollow needle, the fat end of it is the head, and this skinny end is the tail. So I'm going to put the head to 119 degrees. So now, in order to get onto the radial, you need to look at the heads of the two needles. So the head for my RSBN needle is to the left of the head of the hollow needle. So that means I'm going to fly left. If the RSBN needle head was to the right, that means that I would have to fly right. But since it's to the left of the hollow needle, I'm going to fly left. So I'm turning the plane left now. And basically, when you turn left, as you fly, these two needles are going to get closer to each other. We're going to keep flying until we line up these two needles. Now, if I just turn a little bit left, so if I'm going like this direction, you can see I'm only a little bit left of the needles, and it's going to take a long time for them to line up. But if I turn a lot left, if I put the hollow bar horizontal, so as you can see, I have the hollow needle horizontal to me, that is going to make the needles line up really quickly. So as the needles become almost completely aligned, this white bar is going to come in from the side, and when that comes in, that is how you know that you need to start realigning your plane. So you need to turn back toward the RSBN station. So I am going to turn my plane back towards the RSBN station now. So as you can see, I turned a little bit too late and the bar's off to the right now. So I'm just going to fly the plane a little bit to the right. And once the bar goes back to the middle, then I'll turn the plane back to the left, so I'm pointing at the station again. So once you have all these bars lined up, then you should be on the radial. And you can see I'm pretty much coming in from the radial now. Now, it's not 100% perfect. The reason why is because the RSBN station is not exactly in the middle of the airport, so it might not be exactly perfect, but it should be pretty good. So far we have been using the RSBN system in navigation mode, but it actually has two other modes. So if you look at this switch here, you can see the RSBN system also has proceed mode and landing mode. So landing mode is obviously for landing, and proceed mode is basically for if you're at really high altitude and you need to go below the clouds and get ready for landing. That's what proceed mode is for. It kind of brings you through the clouds. Now, in order to use proceed mode or landing mode, you have to have the landing switch dialed in as well. Since we were just navigating earlier, all we needed was the nav switch dialed in, but since we are going to do proceed or landing, you need to have both of the switches dialed in. So let's say I want to land here at Kutaisi. I already had Kutaisi dialed in for navigation, so I'm going to dial it in for landing too. Now I'm going to flip this guy up to proceed mode. Proceed mode is basically the same thing as navigate mode. The only difference is that proceed mode will also give you this extra yellow bar here that will tell you what angle to point your plane at in order to descend through the clouds at a good speed. So as you can see, you want to just kind of keep that yellow bar inside of the circle. Alright, so now let's go over landing mode. So if you flip it to landing mode, at first it will be basically the same as nav mode. What you're going to do is it's going to be basically like radial navigation. The only difference is that with landing mode, instead of dialing in a radio, we're going to dial in the runway heading because obviously we want to land on the runway. So you can see the runway here is 25. So I'm going to dial in 250. And basically you're going to treat it like radial navigation, and you're going to line yourself up with the runway. So now here is where navigate mode is different from landing mode. So with landing mode, once you're lined up with the runway, the airport's going to kind of like lock onto your plane, and it's going to give your plane information on how to come in for a good landing. So as you can see, there's two ovals right here. One of them has a K and it's black right now, and the other one has a G and it's white right now. So if the oval is white, that means it is not locked on. If the oval is black, that means it is locked on. So this oval on the left with the K, that oval is for your left and right. So you can see that means it's black, it's locked on. So that means in terms of left and right, I'm pretty much lined up with the runway pretty good. Now the oval on the right with the G, this is for up and down. And you can see this one is white for me, meaning it's not locked on. So that means I'm either too high or too low. As you can see right now, I'm too high, so I need to get the plane lower so it can lock on to me. So I have just decreased my altitude, and you can see the oval with the G just turned black, so that means that both of these ovals are locked on, and now the landing mode is ready to bring me in for an accurate landing. So once that happens, these two white bars are going to basically turn into ILS bars. If you don't know what ILS bars are, basically these bars are going to tell me if I'm to the right or to the left of the runway, and if I'm too high or too low. So this vertical bar is going to tell me my right and left. So you can see this vertical white bar is off to the left, so that means I need to fly a little bit to the left in order to line the bar up with the middle. Now you can see this white bar here is below me, so that means I need to fly down in order to be at a good altitude. And what you want to do is you want to fly and you want to come in for landing, keeping these two white bars in the middle. Now obviously I don't need to use those bars to land right now, but if it were really dark outside or really foggy and if I just couldn't see anything, then obviously those two bars would be super useful to help me land. Now there's one last thing I want to go over in this video. So since I'm talking about the RSBN landing system, I'm also going to go over the autopilot landing modes. Normally I would go over those in the autopilot video, but since they are very heavily connected to the RSBN system, I decided it would make more sense to go over them in this video. So basically, the landing mode that we just used right there for the RSBN landing system, that basically is connected to the autopilot in the plane, and you can basically have the plane land itself. So on the left side, there is a little panel here, and this is your autopilot panel. You can see there's these two modes here, landing direct mode and landing auto mode. So in order to use these modes, first you need to get yourself lined up with the runway, and you've got to get these two ovals to turn black. So let me do that again. So as you can see, I've lined up with the runway and I got the two black ovals here. So everything is locked on and good to go. Once you've got all that ready, then you can use the autopilot landing modes. By the way, make sure your autopilot is powered on. You want to come over to the right side and power on these two switches here that says AP and AP pitch. So you're probably wondering, what is the difference between direct mode and auto mode? So the difference between direct mode and auto mode is that direct mode is not actually an autopilot mode. Direct mode will basically take control of these yellow needles, and basically the needles will kind of guide you into a landing. If you click auto mode, then it will actually take control of your plane and it will land itself. So let's just do direct mode for now. If you click direct mode, you can see this needle moved off to the left, so you can see it took control of the yellow needles. By the way, if you click the autopilot landing button and it doesn't work, or if the light turns on for a second and then turns off, then make sure that you got everything connected. Make sure you got the black ovals, and then just try again. You can see for me it's working. So for direct mode, basically it will take control of this yellow needle here, and it will tell you if you need to fly left or right. So it's kind of easier to look at than looking down here. Also, there will be these two little yellow needles. This one on top will tell you if you're too much to the right or left, and this little yellow needle will tell you if you're too high or too low. So once again, autopilot direct mode is not really an actual autopilot. It activates these yellow needles and kind of helps you land. So if you do Autopilot's landing auto mode, that will actually land your plane for you. Now, I want to make two notes about this. First of all, it doesn't take control of your throttle. It only takes control of your stick. So you're still going to have to control the throttle. Also, with the Autopilot landing auto mode, it's not actually supposed to take you and land your plane literally all the way down to the runway. It's basically supposed to land your plane for you most of the way down, and then once you see the runway, then you're supposed to take control. So basically, the way this works is you're supposed to turn on the auto mode, and it will take control of your stick, and it'll bring you in most of the way down. And then once you actually see the runway with your eyes, then you're supposed to click the red button on your stick to turn the autopilot off and then manually land it. It can automatically land the plane itself. It can bring the plane down to the runway. It's just that it's not really meant to do that, and a lot of the times if you let it do that, it'll make a really hard landing. So in order to set it up, you do what we've been doing. You basically line up with the runway and you make sure you get the white circles to turn black. So as you can see, I am lined up with the runway. I got the two black ovals. Now I would be good to turn on the autopilot landing mode. So since I'm going to actually land it, I'm going to go ahead and lower my gear and flaps first. By the way, whenever you activate the automatic landing mode, you want to already have your plane lined up pretty well. You want to have the white bars pretty much in the middle, because if you're way off and you turn on the autopilot, it might just not work at all, or your plane might start to do crazy stuff. So you want to have it already lined up pretty well. Also, once again, the autopilot mode will not control your throttle, so you need to control that. A good landing speed to come in is probably around 350 kilometers per hour. It just depends on how heavy your plane is. The manual says that no matter what, do not go below 340 kilometers per hour. That is the absolute lowest landing speed. So I'm going to come in around 350. I'm going to activate it now. And you can see it took control of my plane. Now this landing mode is not really completely perfect. It's very finicky. So as you can see, it just disabled itself. So you need to watch out for that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back on to see if I can get it to work again. It's probably because I turned it on too late. I'm pretty close to the runway. You're supposed to turn it on a little bit farther back out. So I turned it back on, and it looks like so far it's pretty good. It's bringing me in for a landing. I'm staying at around 350, 360 kilometers per hour. Once I get closer, I might slow down a tiny bit. So as you can see, it brought me down to the runway pretty well. At this point, you would probably visually see the runway if you had your lights on. So at this point, you could click the red button to disable the autopilot and take control and manually land the plane. So I'm going to disable it now, and now I can manually bring the plane in for a landing. So the last thing I'll be going over is the box landing. So this is another system connected to the RSBN. So you may have seen these little numbers here earlier, this number 2, 3, 4, and you might be wondering what are those. So those numbers are connected to the box landing system, which is basically a system with the RSBN that allows you to do a landing circuit around a runway without having to visually look outside. You can just look at your compass. So in order to set this up, first you need to set up a regular RSBN landing like normal. So make sure you got your navigation and landing channels set up. Make sure your RSBN is in landing mode. And you want to make sure you set your runway heading using this knob right here. Then basically what you want to do is you want to be coming in to the runway at around 600 kilometers per hour. So as you can see, I'm lined up with the runway and I'm coming in now at 600 kilometers per hour. Basically, when you overfly the runway, you're going to look at the range meter and the range is going to start increasing. Now there's two box landings you can do. You can do a big box or a small box. So if you're doing the small box, which is a tighter landing circuit, then you want to get to 5 kilometers away. If you're doing a big box, you want to get to 7 kilometers away. I'm doing a small box, so I'm going to go to 5 kilometers. So once again, once you overfly the runway, make sure you stay lined up with it. Make sure you stay going 600 kilometers an hour, and you want to get to 5 kilometers away, or 7 if you're doing the big box. So I got to 5 kilometers away, and that's when you're going to make your first turn. What you're going to do is you're going to turn 45 degrees. You're going to bank 45 degrees. You can see your bank angle right here. And you're going to stay at 600 kilometers an hour. And you're going to do a 90-degree turn. So this hollow bar is going to need to be horizontal. So I'm going to bank 45 degrees here. I'm staying at 600 kilometers an hour. And I'm going to make the hollow bar horizontal. So as you can see, I finished my turn. The hollow bar is horizontal now, and I'm going 600 kilometers an hour. So now what you need to do is look at your compass, and there's a circle right here, and you need the circle to get to this number 2. Once it gets to the number 2, that's when you're ready to do your next turn. So as you can see, it reached the number 2, so I'm going to do now another 45-degree turn. So once you finish that second turn, now you need to decrease your speed to 500 kilometers an hour, and then after that lower your landing gear. So I'm going to decrease my speed to 500 kilometers an hour, and I'm going to lower my gear. Then what you're going to do is you're going to keep flying until this circle here gets to the number 3. So since my circle got to the number 3 now, that is time for me to turn again. So I'm going to do another 45-degree turn, staying at 500 kilometers an hour, and I'm going to want to make the hollow bar horizontal again. So once you've completed that turn, if you're doing a small box, you want to lower your flaps to the middle position, and you want to start to slow down to around 420 kilometers an hour. If you're doing a big box, you want to keep your flaps up and keep going at 500 kilometers an hour. You also want to be watching the circle. Once it gets to the number 4, you're going to do your last turn. So as you can see, it got to the number 4 now. So I'm going to do my turn. I'm going to stay around 450 kilometers an hour. Now, a lot of times on your last turn, you might not be lined up perfectly with the runway. As you can see, I'm pretty decent, but my plane is still kind of to the left. So what you want to do on your last turn is you want to look down at this thing, and you want to basically kind of do like an RSBN navigation. So you can see my, if you remember earlier when I talked about radial navigation, you can see my radial needle is to the right of my hollow needle. So I still need to be going to the right. And for your last turn, you can kind of just wait for them to line up together, and then you can turn toward the airport. So you can see they're lined up pretty close, and the bars are coming toward the center. So I can kind of use that to turn in toward the runway. Once you're lined up with the runway, you can go ahead and decrease your flaps all the way, and you can get down to a good landing speed around 350 kilometers an hour. Now, the box landing system is kind of finicky, so if your plane ends up not being perfectly lined up with the runway, don't worry about it, that's normal. It's not a 100% perfect system. That's why it's also important on the last turn to kind of rely more on your RSBN here to make sure you're lined up with the runway. That was navigation in the MiG-21. Thanks for checking out this video, and I'll see you later.